about the president's mixed messages about wanting a trial. Okay, this is what he tweeted over the weekend. He said, many believe that by the Senate giving credence to a trial based on the no evidence, no crime, read the transcripts, no pressure impeachment hoax, rather than an outright dismissal, it gives the partisan Democrat witch hunt credibility that it otherwise does not have. I agree, he writes with an exclamation point. Just a few hours before that, he said that he wanted Nancy Pelosi and Adam Schiff to be witnesses in the very trial that he said shouldn't exist whatsoever. So what do we make of this back and forth from President Trump and his public comments?
It's not only what we make of it, it's what Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell makes of it all, because he's balancing two different trends within his own Republican conference. You got those like Senator Rand Paul, Senator Josh Hawley, who want to move to dismiss the trial once it starts. And then you have others like Senator Susan Collins who are pushing for witnesses. The White House would like to have a very quick, if not no trial at all. At the same time, if Collins and other moderate senators push to have some kind of witness guarantee, then you could see the White House make their own ask of having people like Hunter Biden or Vice President Biden on the witness list.
So at the end of the day, the likelihood in your eyes is, based on your conversations, is that we see a few witnesses, but obviously not the large map that includes Hunter Biden's and Adam Schiff's to testify?
The talks at this moment are pretty fluid. So as a reporter, I'm hesitant to say there's likely going to be witnesses at this point. What we are going to see, based on my own conversations with sources, is a push by Senator Collins, Senator Murkowski, perhaps Senator Romney and others. Senator Lamar Alexander is someone who's often told by top Republicans, to me, is someone maybe on the fence when it comes to witnesses at a trial. But what they say publicly in the coming days is really going to matter in terms of whether McConnell is pressured or not.
So here's what Americans are saying publicly, according to new polling from Quinnipiac, okay? They said, when asked about whether John Bolton should testify, by a 66% margin. Look at that, 66% overall, sorry. Among all voters said that he should testify. They would like to see him testify. And among Republicans, notably, almost 4 in 10 Republicans said they wanted to see him testify. And then whether they approve the House vote to impeach the president by a margin of 51 to 46%. Americans approve the decision to impeach him. 46% say that they believe he should be removed here. Those numbers do demonstrate a little bit of shifting here, certainly as it relates to Nancy Pelosi's desire and her effort to delay handing over the articles of impeachment. It looks like she did herself some good in that John Bolton in that time came forward and said if subpoenaed, he'd testify before the Senate.
And perhaps the attention that was placed on the process that would eventually occur in the Senate was something that maybe pushed those numbers up a little bit more. I think we all know Mitch McConnell. He's not a person who's going to look at one Quinnipiac poll or at polling in general and say, oh, well, I guess we got to have witnesses. He's going to do the thing that he thinks protects his majority and his members, and whether that is allowing for some sort of truncated trial where you have a couple people come in or whether there are no witnesses, he's going to make that determination at the end of the day, and it's not going to be because a majority of people, because there's growing public pressure on him to do, a long, drawn-out trial with a bunch of witnesses, although that obviously plays into the equations a little bit.
And, Kim, the president often says, hey, I don't think they should testify, these officials that work for me, like John Bolton, not because I'm worried about me, but because I'm worried about future presidents, like the altruism that has defined his presidency to this point here. If the president wants to clear his name, to erase this asterisk, as it were, why not allow these individuals to testify and clear the record?
Well, because it's pretty clear that if people come to testify, particularly John Bolton, who described the effort to contact Ukraine in search of information on the Bidens as a drug deal, it probably isn't going to go entirely well for the president. Look, we've seen the president do this at the same time. He proclaims his innocence. We saw it during the Mueller investigation. Sure, I'll testify. I don't mind. I will come in. Oh, wait, my lawyers are telling me that I shouldn't really do this. There is really no appetite to participate in this process at all, which is why from the beginning he's been discrediting it, right, saying that this is a witch hunt, that this is illegitimate. But it will be problematic to bring these witnesses in. It's the best interest to the president and his White House is to have this over as quickly as possible, and that's what Mitch McConnell has all but stated he's going to do everything he can to effect.
And David Jolly, we heard from George Conway and Neil Katyal. They proposed a unique idea, effectively sending just one article of impeachment to the Senate right now. They write the following: separating the two articles, our preferred approach would make perfect sense. When it comes to the second article, all the evidence about Trump's obstruction is a matter of public record. There's nothing more to add, so the second article is ripe for trial. But as to the first, although there is plenty of evidence demonstrating Trump's guilt, his obstruction has prevented all of the evidence from coming to light. Any chance that happens?
I don't think Pelosi has indicated that, but I think it's a brilliant idea. And what the nation and Congress is wrestling with is we have a president who's recently been impeached, who may engage in impeachable behavior before November. And how does the House continue its investigation of the president's behavior? And in this case of the two articles, how does Nancy Pelosi and House Democrats, as custodians of these articles now approved by the House, responsibly transfer them to a Senate Majority Leader who has said he will not be impartial? And, Peter, this possible motion to dismiss vote will be the initial inflection point. Understand, that would be someone offering an amendment that as soon as the articles are received, the first vote is whether to just dismiss the trial altogether. I think it would be a long shot to expect you'd get all Republicans, the likes of Romney, Collins, and others. But the fundamental flaw and the failing of Senate Republicans in this is that they have succumbed to the battle mindset of Donald Trump as opposed to being the fair arbiter. It would be so easy to act in line with the majority of opinions that we saw in the Q poll there and say, we are going to have a fair trial. We are going to have witnesses. And when it's said and done, we likely will vote to acquit the president. But that does not mean he did not have his fair day in court. It's simply how we saw the facts. That's a simple way to acquit the president, but they refuse to do so.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.